audience, but good stuff. So you guys might not know this about me, but I wear contacts. I don't often, you don't maybe often see me in glasses, but I haven't, I've had contacts for quite a while. I got glasses about in 6th grade, I think, and so at that stage of my life, glasses was not a good thing, right? I mean, when I got that diagnosis that I needed that, I tried them on, I picked them out, and I put them on the side, because what if I got picked on, right? I mean, what if the kids at school called me Four Eyes or something? Or what would the girls think? That's probably equally important. So between the vanity and my insecurity, I just chose not to wear them for 6th grade, for 7th grade, and most of 8th grade, until the time came where Mom and Dad said it was okay for me to get contacts. And so that day of me getting contacts is one day that I have yet to have forgotten. It's one that stays in my memory in that Shopko Optical in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, as I put in those contacts and I looked out and everything was crystal clear. I had no idea that that's what the world was supposed to look like. I'd gotten used to squinting at the chalkboard or making basketball got a little harder. It was a little harder to hit a fastball or something in baseball, but I didn't realize how much differently the world was. As I saw the health and beauty sign, and I could see in the distance the menswear sign, it just was amazing to me how I could see. This is what it feels like to fully see. As we continue in John today, we're going to hear an account of a man who Jesus healed, who was blind from birth, who would have said that same thing. This is what it feels like to fully see. So we're going to be in John chapter 9 today. If you want to go there. There's some pew Bibles around you. It will, of course, be on the screen around us. It's 41 verses, I think, so we won't get to every single verse on the screen, but we'll get through the big picture of the whole thing. I think what you'll see as we walk through this together, as amazing of a miracle as it was physically for Jesus to do, to heal a blind person and give them sight, that's just a piece of the bigger picture of what is happening here. That the blindness wasn't only in his physical eyes, but much more than that. And so join me as we go through that together, starting in verse 1. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground. He made some mud with the saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told them, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Let's walk through this just a little bit, because there's a lot in these first 7 verses. The first being blind from birth. Close your eyes, if you would, for a moment. This man had never even seen a sunset. He'd never seen a mountain or his mother's face. He never saw a cute baby or a tree. His eyes likely saw what you're seeing right now: darkness. You can open up your eyes. Now, when I listed those things, my guess is that you had a picture of each of them floating across your brain. You knew what it looked like when I said a mountain or a sunset, right? This man wouldn't have had that luxury. Again, blind since birth. His situation, as far as his sight was concerned, was bleak and hopeless. In fact, he says so himself. Later on, we'll see down in verse 32, he says, "No one has ever heard of the opening the eyes of a man born blind." It didn't happen. His hope for seeing was really no hope at all. There was no laser correction surgery, no other type of surgery that this man could have to fix what he had been born with until he met Jesus. And Jesus did what no one had ever done before. This man, because of his blindness, was an outcast, where we see in a little bit that he was known as a beggar, somebody that the people would have recognized, that they knew who he was. They knew that he was that blind guy, or one of the blind guys in line there as they went in and out of town, in and out of the temple, etc. But Jesus changed his life in an instant. By the way, this "no one has ever done before" kind of statement, we can trace it back to the prophecy from Isaiah about the coming Messiah, where Isaiah says this, "Be strong, do not fear, your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped." Predicted by Isaiah years before Jesus arrived on the scene. So Jesus' disciples, remember, he had been away from his disciples for a little bit as we've been working through the Feast of Tabernacles that he had been at the last few chapters as we go to. Now his disciples have reconvened with him. They see this blind man and they ask the question, why? Why is that man blind? Was it his fault? Was it his sin? Or was it his parents' sin that caused his blindness? Now, it doesn't take us long to figure out how could his sin have affected him if he's been blind since birth. This idea was very Jewish in nature. They traced sin back. There has to be a reason for any type of physical calamity. And to some extent, they were using biblical understanding. They believed that sin could happen in the womb because they knew the story of Jacob and Esau. They knew that in Rachel's womb, Jacob reached out. And so even before he's born into the world, there was sin involved with Jacob. But not only there, they also knew that the Bible specifically mentioned in the Ten Commandments, in the account in Exodus chapter 20, this idea that the sin of the parents goes down to the third or fourth generation. And so they weren't wrong when they assumed that there was somebody's sin caused this man to be blind. But in our day, we don't probably think like that too much, right? Or do we? I wonder if you're tempted like me sometimes when something bad happens to me to look back, I knew I shouldn't have done that one thing. Right now, God is getting me back. He's giving me what I deserve for making that wrong choice. I had two choices in front of me. I wasn't sure which one to pick, and I chose option B, and now God is showing me that that was the wrong option. He's paying me back for my sin or my bad choice. Why did I fail that test, we wonder? Why did that investment fail? I thought it was a sure thing, and we're tempted to think that it must be because something that we've done. It's not the way God works. Jesus explained that while some of what you're thinking is true, neither his parents or him are the reason for his blindness. We're going to use that blindness, though, and we're going to do an amazing thing, he says. The other thing that I was drawn to in this first part is the nature, the method that Jesus took to heal him. Jesus, he tells us in the beginning of John, was there at creation when God spoke into existence everything. Jesus certainly would have had the power, the ability to just simply say, be able to see. But he does something, right? He spits onto the ground. He takes that dirt and he forms it into mud, and he grabs some mud and he puts it on the man's eyes, and he tells the man to go to the pool of Siloam. Go to that special pool dating all the way back to King Hezekiah. Go there and be healed. And that's exactly what happens. And so one thought that I read multiple times about why Jesus did this in my study this week is that Jesus, who was there at creation, took some material that was made into Adam, that dirt, that mud that God breathed life into. Jesus was making a statement right then and there about who he was to those that were gathered. That he was not just a man, he was the Son of Man, the Son of God. And secondly, within that same methodology, we see that Jesus gives the man a role to play. He gives the man this amazing gift, this hope to be healed, but the man has to act, right? Go to the pool of Siloam. So the man has to obediently trust Jesus at his word, with an amazing amount of hope, I'm sure. But he had to act. He had to follow through on Jesus' command. In the next few verses, I'll give you a quick recap here. We see the healed man now. He's healed. He's went to the pool. He's washed. His eyes have been opened. And he goes back home. And when he gets back home, everybody's like, wait a second. That looks like John. It can't be John. He's blind. He's the one by the pool or in town every day. That can't be him. It looks like him. It can't be him. And so they have this back and forth. Again, people that have been around him his whole life aren't sure because blind people don't get the ability to see. It can't be. And so they want to know how this happened. Who did this to you? They knew that it was impossible, and yet it did. And so they brought the blind man, this group of people, the neighbors, the community, brought the blind man to the synagogue, to the temple, to the place where the Pharisees were, the religious leaders, because they are the ones that will be able to tell why. Why? How did this happen? And so that's what happens starting in verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. Then they turned to the blind man again. What do you say about him? It was your eyes that he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. So here we see now the first of three reactions as the Pharisees get this crazy information that a man has been healed from his blindness from birth at that. As always, those schemers need to come up with a plan because Jesus, being able to do that, is going to draw more and more people to him. There must be some way of getting out of this. And so they pull him in. And when they hear it, they know what day of the week it is as they're there together. It's Saturday. It's a Sabbath day in their culture. And so they ask the man what happened, and he says, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. And so their reaction, rather than, wow, seriously, let me see your eyes. Hold up 2 fingers and tell me how many you see, etc. Their reaction, rather than amazing, is, aha! You say he made it out of mud. You mean he had to knead it together? And then he put it... It's the Sabbath day. You cannot do that on the Sabbath day. He is a sinner. He can't be good because he's breaking God's law. Immediately, he's a sinner. So as we've seen many times in this study of John, the Pharisees were stuck on keeping the Sabbath. Don't misunderstand me. God loves the Sabbath. He designed the Sabbath. He showed it in creation. On the 7th day as he rested. He puts it into the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But as we have heard over and over again, the Pharisees keep adding more and more and more rules. God never said you can't knead dirt on Sabbath. said you can't work, and they added what work meant so that they could be seen as good or right in God's eyes. They overstepped and they added many, many provisions. They became legalistic, is a word we would use today, in their faith. You see, they put too much value on what they or the people around them did or did not do. Legalism divided people then. It says it right there in the text. And it divides today. Our sacred cows today might not be as much around the Sabbath day about what we can or cannot do on those days, but our sacred cows might be about music and what we sing or don't sing in church. They might be about what's appropriate to wear to church. They might be our stance on gun control. They might be our stance on what political party we're a part of, but we have things too that are over and above what God requires of us. And that is to love God with all of our heart, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. All the other commands fall under those two things. Legalism divides. Be careful with what you cling to. Finally, then, in this section, we see this man's faith evolve a bit. He sees Jesus more than just a man who he had interacted with. He knows now that this man is special, and he jumps to the conclusion that he must be a prophet. Now, prophet was a high praise back then. That was as high as it could get to some extent. That's what John the Baptist would have been seen as a prophet, though prophets were very few in that day. So it was a high praise that this man was trying to offer to Jesus, but it shows us that he's not quite there yet in his understanding of who he is. And so the next section then tells us that the Pharisees, they didn't believe him. They thought that he had to be making this up, that maybe he wasn't blind in the first place, that he wouldn't have passed the test. So rather than just taking his word for it, they leave and they go find this man's parents. And they ask his parents, "Is it true? Was your son born blind, and can he now see?" His parents are willing to answer that yes, he is their son. Yes, he was born blind. Yes, he now can see. But they won't go as far as saying who did it or why. You see, if they do so, they know, they're afraid anyway, that they'll be kicked out. Because they knew in their day that if anybody started to be a disciple of Jesus, if they started following this character, this guy with the strange teachers, the one who's doing things outside of the normal Jewish way, that their life would be changed. They'd be kicked out of the temple. They'd be kicked out of the synagogue. In essence, they'd be banished from the Jewish community, the Jewish culture that they knew, if it looked at all like they were going to follow Jesus. Now, our day is different, but have you ever been there? Have you ever been a little bit afraid to acknowledge a faith in Christ? Maybe at work you've heard the people chuckle about the people that go to church on Sunday, or the people who actually believe that ancient stuff, right? Or maybe you have somebody in your family or extended family who doesn't believe, and you kind of keep it quiet. Your boss, you're not sure what your boss is going to think if he or she finds out that you're a Christian. They might not take you seriously. They might see you as something a little bit less than intelligent, perhaps. I would guess that somewhere, some way, you, like me, have been tempted to maybe not quite go there from time to time. Well, let me just encourage you with this, and encourage myself at the same time. Any suffering that we take, whether it be physical suffering or relational suffering or social suffering, any suffering that we take on in the name of Christ will be worth it. Anything that we give up in this life, social status, etc., will be nothing compared to knowing Christ Jesus and being in his presence for eternity. Paul is crystal clear about that. All right, back to the text, verse 24. We'll see the Pharisees go back again to the blind man, since round 2, going to the parents, didn't quite solve their problem. A second time, they summoned the man who had been born blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth. In essence, right there, they're saying, put your hand in the Bible and raise your right hand. You're going to take an oath, and we're going to know that you're telling the truth right now. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. And they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I've told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. So we see now a burgeoning confidence in this man as he faces the religious elite of the day, the ones who were supposed to teach him. How did he open your eyes, they ask. I already told you. Do you want to be his disciples too? He's confident enough that he throws in a little satire, a little humor, a little sarcasm perhaps to them. What's going on here, guys? Kind of thing. But then this common only yesterday an outcast blind beggar speaks some amazing truth. You call him a sinner. I don't know if he's a sinner, but one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. You see, I know, guys, that you taught me. You've taught my classmates. You taught my family. You've taught me over and over and over again in Micah and in Zechariah, in the Proverbs, in Psalms, that God doesn't listen to sinners. He listens to the faithful, only to a godly person who does his will. It wouldn't make sense that God would heal my eyes through a sinner. God doesn't listen to sinners. Think about the words that you have taught me since I was a baby, he says to them. Sounds like his faith is growing, that something is changing, that something is opening his eyes in more ways than we thought. Let's finish out the chapter then. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Remember, he hadn't seen Jesus yet. The last he had interacted with Jesus, Jesus sent him to the pool. So this is his first visual. He says, who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. Then Jesus said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, and so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, what? Are we blind too? If Jesus says, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. At the beginning of the chapter, we saw that Jesus completely changed this man's physical life. His ability to see was given by Jesus. His daily experience changed by his vision, a huge change. But even more so, we see in this last bit that Jesus changed everything for him by changing his spiritual world, by showing this man who he was as the Son of Man, the Son of God. His eternity would be changed by an encounter with Jesus. You see, we see this in two words that would be easy for us to look at and gloss over in our English reading view. And that is this. To this man, Jesus changes from sir in verse 36. You can see it there. Who is he, sir? When we address somebody as sir, we are showing them a level of respect. We show that we care about them, perhaps. We're trying to be polite and proper and somebody that might be dignified. We might use that in our everyday context at a restaurant, per se. Some people use it to me when they want to be nice to an official. They might call me sir, right? It's a word that we use that shows a level of respect. Who is he, sir? But just a few verses later, it changes to Lord. Lord is totally different than sir. It implies utmost respect, submission, worship. We see him right then and there worship Jesus. Lord shows dependence, obedience that we would never attach to a word like sir. And so let me ask you this. If you were to look inside your heart and choose which of those two varieties of words, those two words you'd use to describe Jesus in your life, what would it be? Would you see him as somebody who you respect, a good man, a worthy person, somebody who even was willing to die for you? Or do you see him as Lord? That you are willing to submit to what his word calls over your life. That you are willing to obey who he is. That you are willing to worship him, not just by moving your mouth as we sing a song or two on Sunday mornings. Is he Lord or sir? You see, when Jesus becomes Lord of your life, we just got to go back to the beginning. And remember when I talked about this idea that I didn't wear my glasses and I didn't realize that I wasn't able to see as well as I could. My context changed everything. Has Jesus given you sight? Has he changed everything for you? So that you too can say with certainty, one thing I know, I once was blind, but now I see. If that's true for you, then you have all you need, in my opinion, to be a great evangelist, a great teacher, because it doesn't matter, it matters, but it doesn't matter what you can describe to somebody verbatim out of the Bible. What's the most important thing that you can share is what Jesus Christ has done for you. What he has done for them, your listener. Jesus changes everything. I once was blind, but now I see. Share that with the world